The deal, in general, it raises the debt ceiling into March 2017, which averts a default as long as President Obama signs the legislation by this Tuesday, which is the deadline that the Treasury Department set. The deal also increases spending levels over the next 2 years through the end of September 2017. It would be split evenly, $80 billion, between the Pentagon and non-defense domestic programs. Now, that basically means that the 2011 deal that Congress passed to limit government spending over a decade, they are trying to alleviate the caps. They're raising them. Even Republicans in Congress, they feel that those limits that they set back in 2011 were too low. So that's generally what the deal does.
What did it take for the folks to get to this point where an actual bill is about to become law?
Well, it's interesting. This bill basically dropped last Monday night. It was a huge shock to everyone who has been covering the federal budget negotiations over the last year. Democrats in Congress had been lobbying for the White House and for Republicans to come together and hold sort of a budget summit over the summer. So it was a huge surprise to many people.
Phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for our guest, Rebecca Shabad, CBS News reporter. Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And what we thought we would do is not so much talk politics here, but try to unravel the pieces of this large piece of legislation, almost 150 pages. Rebecca Shabad has been with CBS for just about a month now. How is it going so far?
It's going very well, thank you.
Longtime print reporter in budget and Capitol Hill news. Here's one of the many headlines. Bipartisan budget heads to Obama's desk. We do expect the signing to happen tomorrow, at least from what we're hearing. But let's start walking through the pieces a little bit again. You talk about the debt ceiling. It suspends the debt limit on borrowing. This is until March of 2017, as you talked about. A key date was coming in all of that, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. The date was this coming Tuesday. So, you know, the White House and congressional leaders in both the House and Senate, they really got the deal done pretty quickly. And what's really interesting is that these negotiations started in September. And they happened in complete secrecy. They were completely confidential. They happened at both the staff level and among President Obama, Speaker Boehner, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid. They all were talking back and forth since September, but we didn't learn about it until this past week. So it's really interesting how it just kind of materialized out of nowhere.
So as you've touched on, it delays the automatic spending cuts, the sequester, and increases funding by $80 billion. Through September of 2017. Remind us of what the sequester was, why it was put in place, and how they finally got past this.
Sure. So it was a deal that the White House and lawmakers in Congress reached in 2011 after kind of this grand bargain negotiation collapsed. And it was something that they agreed on, but both sides later realized that the caps that they sent over the next decade through 2021, they have just been too low for people in Congress, for appropriators. When they're trying to put together these government funding packages every year, it's just too low for them. So they've done this before. We saw back in December 2013, Paul Ryan and Patty Murray, the chairman of the budget committees at the time, they did basically the exact same thing. They put together a deal that would alleviate those spending limits over the next 2 years. That deal expired in September, and so now this deal is going to take over the next 2 years.
A couple of other points. The bill temporarily shifts money from the Social Security Old Age Fund and into the Disability Fund, and then it avoids a 52% premium hike for some Medicare enrollees. Speak to us about those 2 points.
Sure. So this is kind of a big point and a big provision in the bill. Speaker Boehner and Nancy Pelosi really applauded the way that the entitlement reforms came to be in this deal. The 52% premium hike was expected to happen for Medicare Part B beneficiaries next year to hit 8 million people. This deal basically brings that 52% hike down to about 15%. So it's much lower. That's a huge deal. And then as far as Social Security disability insurance, this is basically the biggest reform to that program since the early 80s. And what it basically does is it reallocates the payroll tax so that it's more evenly distributed between the main Social Security account, the retirement fund, and the disability fund. What that will do is it will extend the disability fund until 2022, around there, and it will prevent a 20% cut for beneficiaries that was expected to hit next year if Congress did nothing.
The bill we read also repeals a section of the Affordable Care Act. Tell us about that.
So it's a part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that has not gone into effect yet. It basically was this provision that would have required employees at large employers to automatically enroll in health plans. This deal eliminates that provision, and a lot of Republicans on the Hill really applauded that provision in the legislation.
Our guest